right. This unit or this lesson, we're going to be talking about what it means to have congruent triangles. So we're going to start off with just a few notes. Congruent triangles, if you have two triangles that are congruent, it means that those triangles have the same shape and the same size. Okay, so they pretty much look exactly the same. This does mean that all the corresponding parts are congruent. So parts of our triangle are angles and sides. So all of the angles are congruent to another angle. All the sides are congruent to another side. So notice right down here, we can write what we call a congruency statement. So notice right here, you've got this side right here is congruent to that side. They both have the one tick. Those sides are congruent. These sides are also congruent. So and then we also know that if they're congruent triangles, that they've also got three angles that are congruent. So that angle is congruent to that angle, B is congruent to E, and that means that C is congruent to F right there. Okay, so when they draw a congruency statement, order matters. You'd have to remember that order matters on this. Order matters. Basically, when you're drawing this, if you have a triangle ABC, is congruent, there's your congruent mark, you've got to line up. So basically, if A here had the one tick, you're going to have to start with D first. And then E and B are congruent, so that goes next. And then F and C are congruent. So they've got to match up with the corresponding angles and sides. All right. One last thing, and then we're going to go on to our first example, but we have a nice lovely thing. It says corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We're going to do that a little bit slower. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so basically what this means is if we know that two triangles are congruent, then we know which angles are congruent to which angles and which sides are congruent to which sides. Let's go ahead and show you how this works. Example number 1, it wants us to list all the congruent angles and sides right here. They've told me, and you're welcome to draw a picture, but you don't really have to right here, because remember the order matters. So they've told us that triangle JKL is congruent to triangle PQR. So that means angle J has got to be congruent to angle P, because notice that they are both the first letters of the triangles right there. Okay, same thing with the middle letters, that K and Q are going to be congruent. So angle K is congruent to angle Q, and the last letters are also congruent. Angle L is congruent to angle R. Okay, so that's what it means when we're asked about the congruent angles. Now, sides are just as easy. You just have to remember, when we're talking about a sides, you use two letters. You use the two letters. So we're going to look right here. We're going to just take our first two letters and say that JK there is congruent to the first two letters over here, which are PQ. Okay, so JQ is congruent to PQ. Also, if you take the last two letters, K, let me just erase that. KL is going to be congruent to QR. So I just looked at the last two letters right there. And then if you kind of jump and do first and last, then we could say that JL is congruent to PR. All right. And then it says, write another valid congruency statement. So there's one more part. Basically, they just want you to mix up the letters. Try this triangle with different letters. So we could call this triangle JKL by lots of different names. Let's just call it KJL. So we used our same three letters, KJL, but they're in a different order. So when we're asked to find another valid congruency statement, we've just got to mix up these letters too. So K, notice, was the middle letter. So that means that I'm going to start with my middle letter of the other triangle. J here was the first letter, so my next letter is going to be the first letter, or P, and L, which is the last letter, is going to correspond with R, which is the last letter over there. So KJL is congruent to triangle QPR right there.